City of Stevens Point Board and Water and Sewerage Commissioners meeting, recorded August 9, 2021.
Right, it is noon, ladies and gentlemen, so let's begin. First order of business is the roll call. I've been informed that May is not going to make it, so we'll show in the minutes that she's excused. We'll go on to the minutes of the meeting of July 12th. Any changes or corrections, additions?
I have none.
Motion is in order.
Move to approve, this is Carl.
I'll second. Ray.
All those in favor signify by the sign of aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Now we have our annual audit presentation by Jody from Baker Tilly. Jody, you're on the stage.
Yeah, Jody's not here. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe what we can do, because I didn't get anything. We were communicating, I think, as late as Thursday or Friday of last week. Said she'd be here in person. Oh, there she is. Come on in. But maybe, do you need a second? Just a brief second. Okay. Jody just walked in. She'll be ready in just a moment. Maybe we can go on to 4 while she kind of gets ready here, and 5, because those are relatively simple and just a discussion.
Go ahead.
Okay. So you'll remember the last time we did a rate adjustment, it was a full rate case on the water side with the PSC, and we had discussed at that time too when we can apply for simplified rate cases, which are it's a quicker process through the PSC, and they generally result in around a 3.5% adjustment, a small adjustment, one of those ways to kind of do maintenance to your rates rather than make big adjustments. This year, the time elapsed that you need to wait. It's a full calendar year after the adjustment type thing. So I just thought I'd put it on here that we're going to file for that, if you should approve that on the water side. And then the next item is more of a item just to say at the same time we'll evaluate the same thing in a similar fashion on the storm and the wastewater side of things.
So this is basically a for your information agenda items.
Yeah, I'd like to get okay on the fourth item there, just so that we will do the application to the PSC with your approval for that whole thing. And then 5 is kind of an FYI. When we get the results of that back, we will bring you information on storm and wastewater also. So
a motion is in order to agree to the simplified rate case process for agenda item number 4.
Right.
Motion is in order.
Anna will move approval on that item.
I'll second. Ray.
Further questions? All those in favor signify by the sign of aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Now we can go back to Jody.
Sure. Jody, you all set?
Where would you like?
Actually, yeah, you might as well sit right here, because then when we're going through this on the screen, you can tell me where I need to be, and then we do have a few by Zoom that can follow along here.
Perfect.
Or even at that, you can drive.
Make it even easier.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for having me here today. So I believe you received the formal documents, the full financial statements in your packets. But what I wanted to go over here is kind of a summary of the highlights, a little easier than flipping through the large document. So as far as our audit process, in theory, not too different from in the past. Our responsibility as auditor is to understand your processes and transactions so that we can identify where the key areas of risk that something might be misstated. And then I design our audit procedures to focus on obtaining evidence of the numbers in those areas as well as other areas. And so we complete that audit testing in order to issue our opinion. What was a little different this year was completing the entire process remote. which is no small feat. So I want to say thank you to management and staff for all the work. We asked for a lot of information, and normally we can just walk up and down the hall and look at things. And so it was a little different when we have to provide it all electronically, but we were able to do that. Management is responsible for the internal controls over the financial reporting, or the day-to-day processing, as well as all the information that flows into those financial statements. So while we assist with putting it into that final format, it is all information from your records. And then there's a representation letter that they provide us that's included as an appendix to the reporting and insights document, just saying that they've shared with us all records and answered all questions, those kind of things. So as I said, our audit approach focuses on some key transaction cycles, things that we often are looking at: cash and investment balances, the revenue and receivable timing, general disbursements, payroll, and the related pensions and OPEBs and the reports that support those liabilities, long-term debt, capital assets, and then because GASB likes a lot of footnote disclosures, we have a lot of additional disclosures that fall into the report. Ultimately, your financial statements receive what we call an unmodified or a clean opinion. So that's the highest level of assurance that we can give. And that lets you and any outside readers know that this is a fair presentation of the financial position and the results of operations for the utilities. As far as internal controls, anything that we might need to disclose there, similar to prior years, we do assist with the preparation of the final financial statement document that you see in front of you. The standards would say that that should be ready when we walk in the door. I can tell you very few governments have the number of staff available to dedicate the time once a year to do that. So this is something that we have to report as a weakness because it's not completed, but it's no change from prior years and not unusual in the industry. So just to be aware of. And then there are a number of areas that the AICPA outlines that are required communications for us as the auditors to all of you as the governing body. If there were new accounting standards, changes in policies, any concerns with estimates or difficulties or disagreements, anything like that, we would report that to you. This is my no news is good news, that I can say I have nothing to report. There were some adjustments identified at year end, I think very consistent with prior years, some of the year end timing items, and those are also included in an appendix to that results document. So moving on to the high level results, I'm going to look at my paper copy so I can see the best way to center this. First, I have the water utility, and so we can see here the actual rate of return. Both the current year and the prior year was just slightly below that authorized rate of return, but really right in line and not too far off. And so I think that makes sense to be looking at that simplified rate increase just to keep up with the inflationary expense increases. But we can see a very consistent margin here between revenues and expenses over the last 5 years. And then a couple of the key benchmarks that we like to look at for utilities. The first is unrestricted cash reserves. The Government Finance Officers Association would say we should have 3 months worth of operations at a minimum on hand. And so we can see here that the water utility historically had sufficient and additional cash reserves, drew those down for some projects, and now is working to build those back up. So we ended 2020 a little over 7 months worth of cash on hand, so a very strong position. We always like to look at the debt coverage because you do have some revenue bonds outstanding. Is there a question? Okay. And so we can see the required debt coverage is a 1.1 times and the actual is 3.84 times. So meeting that requirement and gives you the flexibility if you were to need to issue debt, which leads right to this last bar here. And looking at the end of 2020 for the water utility, only about 22% of the capital assets or the infrastructure is financed with outstanding debt. So that's a relatively low amount of debt. Again, just meaning that you have that flexibility if there were to need to be something for a large project.
What would be a more ordinary amount of equity and debt?
You know, it's really hard to say because of the life cycle of capital assets. We normally say we want to see people somewhere around that 50-50. If you have more
Okay.
than 50% debt, we would look at why
Yeah.
is
Okay.
that. And I would say when I start to see the below 25%, my backup question is always, are you replacing your infrastructure? Are there things that are kind of hanging there ready to go? I know for a fact that there's capital activity every year, so that's not a concern.
Okay.
So then as we move on to the wastewater utility, we don't have a rate of return here because it's not regulated by the Public Service Commission, but we can see those relatively stable margins. 2019 had a little bit of a peak in operating expenses, but they've restabilized down for 2020. And then looking at the cash reserves, similar story here that they've been drawn down with some of the ongoing projects. And so I think, ending the year at about 2 months worth of unrestricted cash on hand is a little below that benchmark. And so that's just something to look at as to how long did it take to build it up. You've drawn it down now over 4 to 5 years. And so maybe look at slowly building that back up a little bit, but not a concern in the grand scheme of things. Again, meeting your debt coverage requirements. The requirement here is a little different just because of the different mix of bonds that have been issued. So it's at 1.25 instead of, I think the 1.1 is because the only revenue bonds are through the state in the water utility. And then here we can see, 49% debt. So again, not up to that over 50%, but definitely more, and that makes sense with the significant recent projects that the wastewater utility has had, that there would be more debt outstanding. Next, we have the stormwater utility. Looking at the operating results over the last 5 years, there's been a little bit of ups and downs here, which is not unusual with the stormwater utility, I think, as they come into their own and there can be some more cycles in those operating costs. But we see that there was a rate adjustment done such that 2020, our revenues did outpace expenses. And so again here, while the cash reserves were drawn down, and I think that was somewhat intentional, they've now stabilized right around that 3-month benchmark for the last 2 years, 3 to 3.5 months. In looking at debt coverage, the stormwater utility well above the requirement, and that is in part because they have very little debt outstanding. I think that too is just in the nature of the projects, the stormwater utility, that the debt can be different. So some of those assets are much more longer lived in the community. Do you want me to touch on the airport and transit?
You might as well, since it's, well, not transit, airport, same commission, it's not
Okay.
agended on the airport commission, so we'll
Okay.
go through it.
So as far as the airport, we look at this a little bit differently. We do have here the operating revenues, kind of what makes up those revenues. And we can see that the city and other local subsidies has been a significant portion and was maybe a little bit larger portion this last year with some of the grant funding that was out there, compared to the operating revenues with the operations of the organization as well being impacted by the pandemic in 2020. And then again, we can see just as the total revenues and total expenses decreased from 19 to 2020 based on that operation impact. And when we look at the operating expenses, continues to be right about that 45% is related to depreciation. So that's something that we recognize for accounting purposes, but obviously is not a cash outlay. And so because of that, we see that the unrestricted cash on hand it looks like it increased in months on hand, but that's because our operating costs were lower. It's really a very stable balance over the last couple years. So something there just to kind of be mindful is it's hard to predict where those operations are going to go over the next year or two. But you've got that reserve to work with.
Jody, does our fiscal year match a calendar year?
Yes.
Okay, good.
So are there any questions?
You make it pretty easy to understand. Thank you.
That's the goal.
Yep.
Is that all you've got?
That's all I've
Okay.
got.
Great. Well, thank you.
I didn't realize, on the question on the presentation,
Yeah.
but just in some of the backup material on, for the, wastewater, stormwater, on page 20, I noticed that there was a comment that the utilities do not have a formal investment policy. And I was wondering if that implied that we should have a formal investment policy?
The standards require that certain things about an investment policy be disclosed if you have one. So when you don't have one, that's how we meet that requirement to disclose what the policy is to say that there isn't one. I'm not sure, does the city have a formal investment policy?
Yes.
That probably could be incorporated to cover the utilities? I mean, you invest in things that state statutes allow, but sometimes investment policies will look at things beyond that as far as how much should you invest in any one type of investment, so kind of a concentration risk or length of investment, to make sure that you're matching when your needs for the cash are. And I think those are all things that management is looking at, but there just may not be a formal policy providing parameters for them to stay within.
With the city having one, doesn't that kind of cover it? I mean, it wouldn't, right? I guess that's the assumption I've been working
Yeah,
on.
you probably do follow that. You could have
Okay.
something more restrictive or more delineated if desired, but not necessary.
Okay, Corey and I can talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get something official,
Yeah,
so we don't have that line in there next year.
Yep.
Thanks, Carl.
Yeah, and for consistency there, then going to page 25, where we talk about investment policy, and then there's a definitive statement that the utilities investment policy doesn't address this risk. So,
Oh, it says does address this risk.
Address this risk.
yeah, it does address it, but if we don't
Yeah.
have a policy.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Good point.
there's some incongruency.
Yep,
Okay,
yeah.
we'll follow up on that.
We'll make a note to get
Yeah.
that clarified for next year. Perfect.
For next year.
So
We'll
this
still
is,
be around.
Well, you know what, next year will be here before we know it. We're halfway through this already.
And
this is
and I also
Anna.
have
I
a-
have one question. Oh, sorry.
Anna, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, okay. I just, in the packet, the fiber department is also listed. Were you gonna go over that as well?
Because the fiber is so new, I didn't really have the type of trend information to go through with that, because
Okay.
that's just been created, but that's something that we'll start building going forward.
Okay, so do we need to be concerned about anything, given what you gave us? Or is it just, everything looks wonderful?
No. I mean, in looking at the statement of net position on page 2, there are cash and investment reserves, so that's good. The bulk of the equity or the net position really comes from the capital assets, which is not a surprise.
Right,
And then in looking at page 3, while we see that slight operating loss, the largest driver of that is depreciation and I think just some timing. So I think really once moving forward, we'll be able to start seeing trends come out of this.
okay,
It's really been in that building phase at this point.
okay, thank you.
I don't believe that there's a need for a specific investment policy. Things may have changed, but when I was the first city finance director, we had a policy and it was very conservative. And basically it mirrored, as was referenced earlier by Jody, what the state statutes allow. And if Corey Laddick or somebody from the water department were doing something that's is not allowed under state statute, that would either be discovered here, or if not here, it would be discovered by the audit that's done for the city. So I'm not a big fan of having any more policies than we absolutely need. And unless things have changed, probably 75% of the investments that both the water department and the city have are certificates of deposit in various financial institutions, mostly in Portage County.
To that end, does it make sense to just note that the city's investment policy is the one that we follow?
That's what I'm thinking we
Okay.
do, is we'll note that you're following the citywide investment policy.
So it's not,
And how
so
that's
it's not
covered.
empty.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, thinking of what's in that policy, I believe it does state that it applies to all funds of the city.
Okay.
So I think that it might apply
Already.
already.
Okay.
And then, it does basically just follow what the state statute says. I mean, there are some other, you know, things that are in a investment policy about like the prudent person standard and, you know, prioritizing safety and liquidity over returns. I mean, there are some other things beyond state statutes, but it's, as far as what's allowed, it follows state statute exactly.
Very good.
Carl had more.
Yeah, I did have another question from the report, under assets for, or capital assets for water,
What page, Carol?
on page 29. We had a significant increase in land and land rights. But I didn't, you know, at first I didn't know if it was, you know, just a bump in property value or if there was an acquisition or a transfer.
This is mostly property we bought up on Torrin Road, I believe, that
Okay.
usually referred to as the Cluck property at the time.
Wellhead protection.
Yeah, wellhead protection purposes, yep.
Fair enough. And if we have questions on airport, do we do that now or do we wait until we're?
That's a really good question because it's not agended under the airport. And I think since she's presenting on it now, if you've got questions, it might. Oh, it is? Oh, geez, good. Ask under airport. Yeah,
That's not a problem at all.
good catch. I guess I forgot, yeah.
All right. If there's no other questions, a motion to approve the 2020 audit report is in order.
I'll move for approval, Ray.
Anna will second. Oh, whoever.
All those in favor signify by the sign of aye.
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 Both same sign. Motion carried. Onward to the water department claims. Are there any questions or comments?
No, not for me.
All right. If not, let's go on to sewage department.
Carl, on 55683, I'm just curious, what's the channel air building? Is that a?
That is one of our buildings within the wastewater plant on campus there. It is a 15 by 15 building roughly, houses our channel air blowers. We've got 2 aeration blowers that aerate a channel going around to keep everything mixed.
Okay.
And that's that building.
Thank you.
Questions?
No.
Here? No, those are the air, right here.
There, yep.
It's this one here. These are the 4 aeration basins right here. This is the channel air building right here.
All the way around the basin, there's a channel that flows from the west side or east side of the basin all the way around and then down. And to prevent any settling in that channel, it's aerated during low flow.
Oh,
So we run those aeration blowers from about midnight to about 6 a.m.
so there's a low flow daily during that,
Yep.
that period.
Any other questions on sewage? If not, let's go on to wastewater.
Stormwater, yeah.
Stormwater.
No.
Questions?
Mm-mm.
If not, a motion is ordered to approve all three sets of claims by department.
Haynes will
Move to
move
approve.
approval.
Second.
All those in favor signify by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign, motion carried. Water supply and distribution reports, Eric?
Now, good afternoon, everybody. Nothing really to add this month, unless you had any questions for me. Again, water usage is a little up, but that's kind of common this year, so keep it short and sweet.
Any other questions? Okay, let's go on to water supply, Eric. Chris, let's go on to sewage treatment operations.
Right, the wastewater plant did meet all of our permit requirements for the month of July. We were able to finally replace the variable frequency drive on the gas skid that provides fuel for our biogas engine. So mid-month, we finally got that unit back up and running. We were able to still produce about 8% of our electricity used on site. And then we also produce 62% of the heat that we utilize on site as well.
So
Very good.
can I ask, I think this question probably goes to Joel. The solar panels on that roof, how much electricity does it produce for that building and maybe others? I don't know.
You know, I think the best way for me to answer that is to put an item on next month for you to give you maybe a year in review. One of the things we struggled with right up front is that we couldn't put the rate structure in that matches our WPS rate structure. It was a very flat rate structure, so we can see power generated, power consumed, but we can't do the calculation perfectly on dollars and cents inside that same report. So I'll bring it back next month on something that gives you kind of a year in review type thing.
Well, I'm asking because I know we just reviewed all of the accounts and we pay a lot in utilities. So I'm just wondering if putting those solar panels up made any difference whatsoever.
Actually, yeah, you know, and this winter we were actually able to keep them basically free the whole winter of snow and ice, which was really good. The winter prior, there was no power coming off of those the majority of the winter. So to that end, maybe what I can do is go back a couple years and show you that just what the difference is. And there are times, you know, on a nice sunny day, we're making way more power than we're using. And there are times on cloudy days when we're not. So I think they definitely did pay off to put them on there. And we can, now that we're a few years in, we can probably calculate a more accurate ROI on those operationally to say,
Yeah.
hey, this many years out, they will have paid for themselves.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Chris.
You bet.
Good question, Anna.
Were you- Chris is done? Okay.
All right, are
Yeah.
we ready to go on and review the correspondence dated August 3rd from Chris regarding the boilers?
Yes.
All right, so in January, when we brought the capital improvement plan to the commission, we had a blank spot for some heating boilers for the service building, which is our main two-story building across the road here. We've got that one, and then there's three other buildings. So basically kind of everything in the middle there, those three buildings, and then the digester complex off to the east. We've got two heating boilers that utilize natural gas and hot water to heat those buildings. Obviously with our current cogen system, we're able to utilize a lot of the off gas or waste heat off of that to heat those buildings. But during the very cold months of the year, we do end up using those heating boilers. Those heating boilers were initially installed in 1992, so they've definitely met their life expectancy. They've actually had a couple failures, and we've rebuilt them a couple times in the past 5 years. So they're basically they need to be replaced, which is why we put them on the capital list. But now we're looking, we finally got some quotes, and we're looking for approval for up to $50,000 of replacement fund money to replace them.
So what's the projected lifespan for the new ones?
That's a great question. I'm not positive.
Hopefully 30 years like the last one.
30 years,
Yeah.
ideally.
Yeah.
You know, they're definitely new technology. They're not just dumb heating boilers anymore. You know, they're high efficiency units. You know, we're going from about 78 to 82% efficiency to about 97 to 98%. So they're definitely not the same type of units. I'd imagine they're going to require more maintenance than the current ones do, you know, on an annual or biannual basis. You know, just having people check them out, that kind of stuff. But I would imagine they'd last.
Okay, I just wondered.
Are the condensing boilers, is that, on a natural gas, which is?
I'm not positive on
Usually that's where you get that big bump from, you know,
Inefficiency.
high
Yeah.
70s to high 90s. Condensing the gas, the flue gas.
Okay.
Not sure.
I'm not positive. Not a boiler guy.
Well, the other thing is that, you know, they're pretty significant in size, right? So when they're needed, they're throwing off a ton of heat, and they're big. And so to get that kind of efficiency, you're right, they may be condensing, but there isn't a huge range of options in these things either, really. You know, I mean,
They've got to be sized big enough to do all of it without the engine running.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's, you know.
So you're keeping buildings, and then how much liquid volume heated if needed?
It won't be the liquid volume at all. This
Oh, it's
is
not
just-
any of that.
This is just building.
Just building heat. Okay, all right.
So these are
So
only,
anyway-
you're just asking for 50,000? They don't,
Yep.
I can imagine they would cost more than that, but yeah.
We've got just one quote right now.
We've got two back right now.
We've got two back that fit within that. So,
Oh, okay.
and this would be one of those things on the capital, you'll see that asterisk next to them for things that are eligible for replacement fund dollars, and these are.
Okay.
All right, so a motion to approve a maximum of $50,000 is in order.
I'll move for approval, Ray.
Haynes will second.
All those in favor signify by the sign of aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Construction and maintenance report. Craig?
Good afternoon, everyone. The construction, our water service crew has replaced, I think we discussed this morning, 19 lead service lines so far this year, which we're at where we wanted to be, actually a little bit more. We look forward to doing about 6 more yet this year, hopefully this fall. The storm sewer crew finished up a nice little project on Echo Dell that's been on our schedule and radar for a few years. Turned out really nice. Homeowners seem to be very happy, so. Our construction projects, the one on Coy out on the industrial park is doing really well so far. All the water is doing what it's supposed to do, so that project looks good. The north side project is moving fairly slowly. Looking to close down First Avenue possibly middle of this week, beginning of next week, by Center Point Drive, so. Other than that, any questions?
If not, let's go on to Joel's report regarding the community area network.
Same things to report here. We'll be getting together bids for some more work for current and potential customers on this. That's all pass-through type costs. In addition to looking at getting to a couple other city facilities. So there's always stuff developing here. We're also looking at secondary connections to WISNET for a citywide effort to make us a little more robust in the time of an outage. So that's all I've really got there.
All right, that includes your director's report.
It does, nothing to add.
So a motion to adjourn is in order.
I'll move to adjourn, Ray.
All those in favor signify by the sign of aye. Aye. Both same sign, motion carried.
Videos of these meetings are available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.